Okay, so I'm Anna Hudson, Member Services Supervisor for RSA and proud member of the RSA Day Committee. And of course, we are very sad to have had to cancel that event, but fortunately, our keynote speaker, John Chrastka, is a lovely person who has been willing to work with us to put together a virtual version of his keynote presentation. So John Chrastka is the founder and executive director of Every Library, and he's a longtime library trustee, supporter, and advocate. He's a former partner in Associate Direct, a Chicago-based consultancy focused on supporting associations in membership recruitment, conference, and government activities. He's a former president and member of the Board of Trustees for the Berwyn Public Library, and a former president of Rails, a multi-type library system. He was also named a 2014 Mover and Shaker by Library Journal. So we are very excited to have him as our virtual RSA Day keynote speaker. So with that, I will turn it over to John, and I will mute myself. Thank
Anna,
you very much.
Anna, thank you so much. Mary, also, I appreciate the opportunity to hang out with you guys. It's the 22nd of April right now. I've got two kids downstairs who are trying to do school from home right now. My wife is in and out of her conference calls. I got two cats that might jump on here, and I don't have as cool of a background as Anna does, but I'm hoping that we can spend a little time together to talk about what the current reality of things are around budgets and finances and political priorities, and there we go. And I think you almost accidentally unmuted me. So looking for priorities around politics, around funding, and a thoughtful engagement about what the challenges are going to be moving forward for us. There's a reality on the ground right now here in Illinois. I'm in Berwyn, Illinois. 60402 is my zip code. I know that 94% of the funding that comes from my local library is raised and expended in 60402. 94%, including grants. I also know that 42% of our collection back a couple of years ago, I didn't look at the most recent IPLAR, I'm one cycle off from looking at it, but the most recent one that I looked at, I think it was 2017, 42% of our collection was resource shared collections. The leverage, the massive amount of leverage that comes in from interlibrary loan, cooperative purchasing. It's why I served as a civilian. I'm not a librarian myself. Why I served as a civilian on the Rails board as well as on the Metropolitan board before that. The work that we do in this space around leverage is perhaps the least well-known story in library land in Illinois and around the country. It's the secret sauce that makes our library so strong around here. I'm not providing advice about logistics today or about how resource sharing can be done better, how bins need to be picked up, or how stops need, none of that. What I'm trying to talk about today is how human beings who pay taxes, either as voters in a district, as constituents of elected officials in towns and cities and counties, or as elected officials, how folks are wired to think about taxes that fund what we do here as the common good. Really briefly, let me just give you, not a commercial, but a little bit of context about where I'm coming from here. Every library is a political action committee for libraries. We're set up as a 501c4. It's very different than the C3. C3s are set up for charitable purposes, associations, nonprofits, etc. C4s are super PACs. We can raise and expend unlimited funds to advance our nefarious special interests. And you folks are my nefarious special interest. Congratulations. We work on library election day. We work on library budget day at the local level, sometimes in an area as small as one zip code. I always talk about in national presentations when I'm going around the country, I talk about our biggest libraries and our smallest libraries. Our biggest ones are like Dallas, New Orleans. We helped with Miami-Dade County a couple of years ago avert a very bad budget cut that the mayor of Miami-Dade County was putting through. And then the smallest ones that we've worked on include our dear friends over in Potomac, Illinois. 646 people live in that town. The entire district that we helped them create on election day was what, 1244? The questions that people ask in both New Orleans and in Dallas and in Santa Clara County, in, well, Potomac, Illinois, and your place in Berwyn, my hometown, 60402, they're the same questions. They're questions about where's my money going to go? Sure. But there's questions about, well, who's going to spend my money? And those conversations around the where my money's going to go tend to be done inside libraries with features rather than with the value system. Now, I don't mean ROI when I say value system. I'm going to come back to values a couple times in this presentation, but it's about deeply held beliefs. It's about hope. It's about who we want to be as neighbors, taking care of neighbors pre-crisis, but certainly during what we're going through together right now, and what's going to happen after. And the who is going to spend the money. I'm sitting here on the 22nd of April with you folks right now, knowing what's going on in Moline, what's going on in some other places right now, where there's hard decisions being made about furloughs and layoffs. And I want to make sure that we can come together where the greatest resource that we can share might be support for each other. All right. Every library, 501c4, political action, also pro bono. I want to mention that real quick. Whenever we work with the library, we always do it for free, and pro bono, we're donor supported. Whenever we work with the library, we always want to take a look at the data first. Some of it's about the circ stats, some of it's about your materials handling, some of it's about what goes on behind the scenes, some of it's about the data that is about how voters and constituents of your elected officials are wired to think, feel, act about taxes. Because like I said before, 94% of the funding for my hometown public library, the Berwyn Public Library, 94% in one zip code, and it's property taxes. And it's a dedicated levy. And then it's some supplements from sales tax and use tax and gasoline tax that are really shaky right now. And I know they're shaky right now because my wife's on the school board here in Berwyn, South Berwyn District 100. My dad's the president of the zoning board. We're still pretty much, I haven't been on the library board in a while, but I pay attention. Okay, the data about where people are coming from when you start talking about taxes and libraries. This comes from Pew. It is background radiation. This is not a decision-making set of data points for you. It's also sort of a given, but it's soft. Yeah, it's nice. It's nice that people, that's all it is. The data about voters is where we root a lot of our activities here at every library, because that's where decisions are made, either voters directly for a district or as constituents of elected officials. And our voter data is a little soft too, nationally. Voter data here is from OCLC and the From Awareness to Funding study. 2018, I'm going to show you the 2008 data in a few minutes, a 10-year longitudinal approach to this. There's a softness when only 55% of voters say that libraries are essential. And there's going to be situations happening during the current crisis where the nice to have versus the must have conversation is going to get really bloody. And we're going to want to pay a lot of attention, I think, to moving this needle towards essential to make sure that if there are threats to our work, we can be positioned in that essential place. But it requires some visibility. 53%, a source of community pride. 51% enhancing the quality of life. Folks, we need to work on this because these are not numbers that you necessarily take to the bank. People are wired in a particular way to think about libraries. There's a significant disconnect between people's user experience of the library and people's personal, deeply held value system about what librarians do and who libraries are. And the joy of resource sharing, the joy of interlibrary loan, the secret sauce of making sure that the thing that somebody needs, whether it's digital or a print copy, gets into their hands, is part of that value system. If we look back at the Pew data, this is from Pew Charitable Trust's 2016. It was March and April of 2016. It's getting a little bit old now, but at the same time, it hasn't moved very much. And what we don't know post-COVID, what we do know pre-COVID, though, still is in operation. People look at what you folks do inside libraries as being extremely high impact, and it's extraordinarily disconnected from what they're doing themselves at your library. People look at, you provide a safe space for people to spend time when we can do that legally. You create educational opportunities for people of all ages, digital, in person. You help spark creativity. I hope that those kids are showing up to your chats. You provide a trusted place for people to learn about new technologies. These are value system statements. I mean, I don't know how many of your elected officials, how many of your average population need your help bridging the digital divide. I don't personally, need your help bridging the digital divide. I can bridge the digital divide on the devices that my children have lost or broken. Like, we're fine over here. We're set. We're good. I'm cool. In fact, I don't need a safe place right now. I have a bit of privilege. I mean, my home is not, and yet there but for the grace of God go I. There but for. Like, what happens to those other people? You know, I'm fine. If it takes you 2 or 3 weeks to get me a book that I want, I'm fine. I'll wait, you know. But what about the research moment, the scholarship moment, the study moment, the discovery moment? What about what happens to the blind and visually impaired? And I'm certainly not myself. There's a well of compassion here, folks, that is disconnected from what people, well, the number one thing that people do at the library themselves is they get stuff. And right now, the number one thing they're doing with you is they're getting digital stuff. And yet there's a value system that they see you expressing. In fact, this is a really interesting data point from Pew. Again, 2016, but I think if you'd ask people generally in a non-crisis time, but if you ask them sincerely during a crisis, what would happen to your local community if the library closed? I don't mean that we can't socially distant right now. I mean, we're not going to be there at all, even digitally. What's going to happen? Is it going to be a minor impact or a major impact on your community? 66% of Americans in this Pew survey said there'd be a major negative impact on their community. And 25% more would say there'd probably be some impact. Yeah, I can kind of get that. I don't know who these 6% are who say there's no impact. And yet they said about themselves and their families, the people they love the most, only 33% would say there's a major negative impact on themselves. 33% said, yeah, we kind of inconvenient. Yeah, I get that. 33% of people are saying, I'm fine. No offense, I don't need you personally. But 66% say that there would be a major negative impact. We have to remind people right now in this crisis of their heart, their head, and their gut that says this. There's a depth of compassion. There's a depth of compassion that says, I'm okay. What about those other folks? What about those other folks who need that? And if all we're doing with our marketing and our messaging right now is positioning somebody to become a user, when most users even say that I'm okay, we're missing a whole significant values-based, mission-aligned set of marketing messages about what it takes for tax money to run this place. 2008, back to the OCLC data, there was some real strength. 37% of Americans would definitely vote yes for the library. 37% more were likely to vote yes for the library. This is pre-Occupy Wall Street, pre-Tea Party, pre-Trump, pre-Obama, pre a lot of stuff. 74% of American voters back then in 2008 would have said yes to the library. And we've seen a lot of erosion in the last 10 years. And this is even getting, like, we have no idea what the data is today. And I'm going to be really frank with you. We don't know, but neither does Trump, neither does Biden, neither does Pritzker, neither does anybody who's running for dog catcher know where the voters are. We're too close to the turmoil. But the background, radiation on libraries is it's gotten softer. Fewer people say yes, definitely. In fact, let me show you this chart more extensively. Of the super supporters, the people who are believers, who love what you're doing, that the library is a top 5 issue in their personal life, definitely top 10. We have lost ground in the last 10, 12 years. We've lost 6 basis points in them as a percentage of the population. We've lost, 16 percentage points on the number of them who would definitely vote yes for the library. I'm looking at the green line at the top here. And yet they still use you a ton back when they could. And they're probably the ones who are downloading stuff like crazy right now also, because they rate libraries very positively, which is a joy. I'm really glad to see that. And I got to tell you, I'm a little nervous because there's some softness here in the way they look at librarians. Probable supporters, folks who have, not necessarily libraries in their top 5 or top 10, but definitely they're civically aligned. They're the folks who care about the whole life of the child, but aren't necessarily into summer reading. They might be doing sports. They're the folks who care about workforce development and don't understand that that's what you guys are up to. They're the folks who care about the blind and the visually impaired, but haven't really put two and two together on what delivery really means. We've lost some of them as part of the general population. They have diminished in their percentage of folks who would say yes for the library. Yes, they've diminished also in their use of the library, but they still drive by, they see the parking lot is full, and they think everything's fine. They still rate libraries just as positively. They're just not willing to pay for it. And in a moment of crisis, the push and the shove between must have and nice to have needs to be explored. And we have to remind folks, we have to surface what we're doing in a value system way, because the folks who care about the whole life of the child want to make sure that every child has access to those materials. And the library is set up, when it's reopened again to public services and digitally right now, set up as that clean, well-lighted, welcoming, accessible place. And yet we've lost some ground also about their perception of who we are, which makes it very difficult to answer the question, not only where's my money going to go, but the who's going to spend my money. In fact, I want to yell at some librarians. Over the last 10 years, we've lost some real ground. Again, this is from OCLC and the From Awareness to Funding Study, 2018. Now it's all pre-corona, pre-COVID, the whole thing. And yet it's the basis for where we're launching our conversations about making sure that the funding for the library is stable and the libraries are seen as essential. We have to be seen in this current crisis as doing the work that is necessary, doing the work that is germane, doing the work that is impactful. Even if I personally never come to your online story time, I might even, I mean, I got 2 kids at home, but they're too old for online story time. They would roll their eyes to the point where they would fall over backwards if I suggested they go to an online story time. And yet, I value the fact that you are standing in an educational gap right now, if you ever told me you were. And it's not just the library abstractly, it's Miss Karen who's doing that online story time. It's Mr. Greg who's helping the seniors figure out how to get the Lifeline telephones. It's folks who are answering questions at 2 o'clock in the morning because 24/7 reference matters in their community. It's the people going in wearing masks and maybe gloves right now to make sure the Wi-Fi is still on at a high enough, whatever level that happens at. I don't know anything about technology for the parking lot. And to tell that story to people about who's doing it is really key, because otherwise, well, the last line here about being well known in the community, this isn't my data, this is OCLC, blame them. Well, don't blame them, blame ourselves, because if we're not well known in the community during a moment of crisis, who do they turn to? The other thing that's in the data, the OCLC data, is that political party doesn't matter about where somebody lands on that believer system, that they're really into libraries, whether they have questions about what the library is doing, or whether they're never going to support us at all. The statistics in the community about card holders and how many downloads you're getting right now and how many session visits you're getting don't matter at all when it comes to support. I'm going to tell you why about that more in a moment. The level of use and therefore the user status of that voter doesn't matter with regard to their interest, their value system in supporting tax money to pay for you, especially when times are tight, especially when things are dire, especially when things are grave. I don't need the help personally means that if you said to me, if the library closes, you, John, will not get, it doesn't matter to me. I don't use it anyways. What about what you're doing as a proxy for my compassion? What are you folks doing right now as librarians, as library workers, as staff, to operationalize a set of values that I have that goes back to that Pew slide? That place, that context, that delivery vehicle for transformational work. I'm fine. I'm fine. I can ride this thing out with a mask on. I'm a little bored right now. My kids, I'm helping them out. But what about those other people? So pitching what you guys are doing to me as something that you're fulfilling for me personally. No, no. Pitching what you're doing for the community, for particular populations, folks at the margins who are vulnerable, who are at risk of, like, I don't know how your school districts are doing, but those gaps. And a lot of what we talk about reading right now is very noble. There is something to be said, though, for just saying, okay, let's just help people ride this thing out. This is from a great little project that was done by a fellow named Tim Coates. He's over in the UK, but this was his sample survey of like 1,200 Americans a couple months ago about what are you reading? It was a great question. What are you reading? And about 2/3 of folks are like, I'm just reading because I like to read. And so to be able to even position what you're doing right now with digital around delivery of some things that help us not go crazy in isolation is probably a good messaging environment. Also, to tell folks that what you're delivering right now, what you're sharing right now, what you're leveraging right now, doesn't all have to be noble. It could just be a little bit of fun. All right, so let's talk about what does matter. I want to pull some of this together for you and hopefully give you some actionable advice. That background noise, that background radiation about how people are wired to think about, well, where's my money going to go and who's going to spend my money? They look fundamentally, this is OCLC again. It's really interesting reading. If you've got some time right now, some of us do, some of us don't. If you've got some time right now, I'd highly recommend both the 2008 and the 2018 From Awareness to Funding study. Geek the Library, Libraries Transform, a number of different initiatives come from this. The library is not perceived as just the practical deliverer of stuff. It's perceived as a transformational change agent in the community, and the folks who work at the library by the transitive property are transformational change agents themselves. And the word force is in here, and that's a fascinating word. There are plenty of people who need your stuff right now, and there are more people who are making decisions about where a limited amount of tax money goes who should be supporters. There are more people who are making decisions about where a limited amount of donor money goes who should be donors. There's going to be a time where you're going to need a bigger bench of volunteers and networks. And I'm concerned that all we're trying to, that we need to take a look in a very strong way about using this opportunity to talk about how you, right now, with the limited resources that you have, are realizing a value system. And that your mission, vision, and values aligns with folks who are supporters, activists, donors, volunteers, voters, and constituents, and not necessarily users alone, or maybe ever. The messaging model that we have for library advocacy right now is not doing us any favors. It's very one way. We don't ask enough questions back. And we don't necessarily synthesize the answers that we're getting. The message is one way, and it's also very much about everybody receiving the same message. And yet the folks in your community who are true believers about the library, who look at libraries as a top 5 issue in their lives, is only about 7% of the population. The other 93% have other alignments. They listen to what you're talking about in a different way than just literacy, just learning, just library. They're aligned on, well, the big things that are happening in their lives or in their value system. It might be about education. It might be about workforce. It might be about a more interesting place to live, a more helpful place to live, a more connected place to live, a more thriving place to live, a more prosperous place to live. The issues need to be teased out and to be made more clear that are beyond literacy. And we need to invite people to tell us the work that you do in this resource sharing rubric is magical. I need something and it pops up in 2 to 3, 4 days. I need something that was obscure and hidden and it appears. And the magic You know, open up the box on it. Yeah, it's a mess. I know it's a disaster area sometimes in the back room. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, like, why are we doing this work? It's because of a value system about access and about equity. And there are people who don't need a book, who don't need a download, who don't need a streaming service, who don't need anything right now from you, who are grateful that you're standing in that gap. And we have to be able to set up a situation where they can tell us that. And yet most of our marketing is focused, again, this is OCLC, this is from a different survey, this is 2019, about why do we do marketing inside Library Land. And most of it, 87% of the respondents to this pretty significantly large survey, said that we're trying to get awareness in the community or use in the community rather than support from the community. Storytime, 10 a.m., bring your kids. Storytime, dial in, 10 a.m., bring your kids. All right, great. Use. There's only 30 people on a Thursday morning who are free in person. There might be 60 people digitally if you can find them. Storytime, 10 a.m., bring your kids. Great. There's one enhancement, two enhancements. One is Storytime, 10 a.m., bring your kids. Miss Karen, who loves your kids, is going to be acting like a goofball on the other side of the little webcam in order to help teach letter shapes and numbers and be your partner as a parent in first language literacy for your kid. The other part of it, though, is what to say after that program wraps up. And I'm using the Storytime example because it cuts across everybody. Everybody's got Storytime. Summer reading. Everybody's got summer reading. What did we do yesterday about Storytime? Miss Karen had 30 kids or 5 on a web chat with parents to help them stand in this gap. Miss Karen, who loves those kids, needs to do this tomorrow as well because of the need in our community, because of the hope that we have and the value system that we have aligned around not just the delivery of a program, but the realization of our value system. There's plenty of people in your community who are not eligible to bring their kids at 10 a.m. or log on at 10 a.m. because they don't even have any. And yet they have a value system that says we should be taken care of. That extends to all of the other work that we're doing, either digitally and asynchronously, digitally synchronously, or in person eventually, once we can unwind this ready to reopen conundrum. It's not about building users. It's about building supporters. People will become supporters on the way to becoming users too. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting you minimize any of your marketing right now about what you got. You got good stuff. And there's some people who want it in particular, and I hope you're using data to help determine who that is. But the value system conversation, there are 4 kinds of supporters in politics. It's a fascinating little bit of politicking here. The rest of this is all political theory. And I want to teach you the political theory that I know. We've had 111 election days as every library. We've had 86 wins. We've helped secure several $100 million, like $328 million in stable tax money for libraries. Our losses have been heartbreaking, and I'm sharing a lot about how to not lose these days. But our wins have been always based in a conversation around the value system of the community, and not just the answer to the question of where's my money going to go, which we're going to get into in a minute, the answer to who's going to spend my money, which is this concept I'm about to start to unspool, but also the answer of who else cares. Who else cares about those populations in this place that we call home? All right, there are 4 kinds of supporters for anything political. And libraries only have really 3 of them, kind of. Relational supporters are folks who identify with, well, what you're doing, who you are. They like librarians. They might not understand the difference between a library worker and a librarian at tech services, and they don't know the brand names that we have inside Library Land. If the kid runs up to you in the grocery store, you're their librarian. And they like librarians. They identify with them. They think you're cool because they think that you're, how do I want to put this? They actually love libraries and they actually love librarians. It's a small number. There's an ideological alignment, though, that supporters have, which is that you're doing something that they think is important, they think is valuable, And I'd like to see that ideological circle grow more and more. Right now, we've got literacy pretty well locked down. Do we have workforce and economic development locked down? I'm not sure. Do we have livable communities locked down? Kinda. There's also supporters who hang out with candidates and go to political rallies and stuff because they don't like the other guy or the other gal. And there's a little bit of that inside library land, where people are like, I'm against injustice. So libraries are for justice and I can hang out with you guys. But it's not a very big circle. And then the last one is access. This is for politics. It's like the people who want to buy the $1,000 plate dinner to hang out with a particular candidate. If any of you are that person in library land, call me directly. I want to hang out with you too and find out how you did that. But really, we don't have a whole lot of access supporters inside library land. We have a lot of people who say what the librarians are doing, again, that registered trademark librarian matters in the world, and I want to be around it. I'm going to remind you too, and I'm not looking at the chat right now, but we're going to do chat questions at the end, all right? Or you can tag us at @everylibrary for that long tail Q&A on Twitter. Happy to do it. All right, let me spool out some more political theory for you. We use two metaphors inside our campaigns, whether it's in a town as big as Potomac, Illinois, or as big as New Orleans, or as big as Darby, Montana, or Georgetown, California up in the Sierras, or the west side of Kansas City. We use two metaphors. One is that the library itself is the incumbent. The incumbent here in politics matters because in every particular race, in every conversation around priorities in this country, people are wired to listen to the incumbent and the insurgent, the in-power party and the party that's outside of power. It's a wiring problem that we have with libraries because we're not on either party, and party support doesn't matter, as I mentioned before from the OCLC data. The library is the incumbent because, well, you either have to run as the incumbent or you have to run against yourself. If you run as the incumbent, you're basically saying to folks that new money extends your success. You've done something before for them. Send me back to Washington, send me back to Springfield, I'll keep taking care of you. The library is fundable because of your prior success. Or you have to look at your incumbent or the incumbency in a different way and actually run against yourself. If the incumbency is some sort of systemic problem or even a failure that needs to be addressed. New Money Fixes Failure says that we have to run against ourselves by naming the failure and talking about how new funding or new support, new networks, new relationships, new donors, new volunteers will help fix that failure. There's some integrity there. And we also use the metaphor of the librarian as candidate because of two reasons. One is it answers the question of who's going to spend my money, and it's how people are wired to look at who's going to spend their money. We don't elect party slates here. We elect people. And by electing people, well, Miss Karen, who loves your kids, Mr. Greg, who does this kind of work for seniors, for folks. All right. How do people relate to candidates? Again, some political theory for you, because what I want you to be able to think about here is how do you position the work that you're doing in this RSA community? How do you position the work that you're doing in relation to the way people are thinking about taxes, the way people are thinking about, honestly, power? How voters relate to candidates. This comes from a very interesting book called The Political Brain by a fellow named Drew Weston. I apologize to him publicly right now for not putting a citation on this slide. I'll do it before I send you the stuff, Anna, for the upload, okay? The Political Brain, it's terrifying reading. Don't read it before bed, okay? Because it talks about the dark side of politics as well as the light side. Shared values and shared identity drive a lot of decision-making in politics. If I had a really long slide, I'd have a giant gap between shared identity and personal characteristics about the candidate. And I'm going to say this to you honestly, for every Donald Trump, I'll raise you a Bill Clinton. Like, people tend to overlook the characteristics of the candidates because we have a value system that the candidate resonates with. Excuse me. Not now, kids. Great fun. No. So the value system that the candidates have and the identity. It's why Donald Trump, it's why Bernie Sanders ran as Republicans and as Democrats, even though they weren't. And that's a really confusing situation sometimes, because if you're on the other party, you look at them as a faker. And if you're on the correct side of the party for yourself, I mean, you look at them as being somebody who's finally seen the light and come over to the good side. The value system that is inherent in your community about literacy, about lifelong learning, about support for people when they're looking for work, about helping people find the right kind of health information, about all of the good stuff. And the idea that we're doing it together with the library as an institution drives a great deal of decision making. And yet the fourth thing on the list is the particulars of the features that you need to get funded. How many books, how many copies, how many downloads, how many miles do we have to drive, how many dollars, how many people, how many are all those details. It's the expression of those details as a shared value system or a shared identity around taking care of the other that makes you fundable. This is how candidates do it. This is the last round. This is not the current round. The current round is too weird. But the last round, I mean, by the time we get to 2024, I'm really hoping that we can just have the major political parties talk to the tech services folks and find out what the circ stats are for all the books from all the candidates. I mean, if you love the candidate, you will hold that book dear to your heart. If you don't like the candidate and you're reading the thing and it violates your value system, you're going to throw it across the room. The circ stats do tell a story. How many people resonate with that value system of that candidate? And I want to ask you, how do we position our needs in relation to the way people are wired to talk about them? How do we position our tax requests, our funding needs, our donor needs in relation to how people are wired? Now, I mean, I apologize. I don't know if anybody from Berwyn Public Library is on this, but when I was board president there, I was board president for 6 years. I was on the board for 8 years. We did 2 strategic plans, and we named them the wrong thing. I think we named them like Ahead to 2015 and like the 2020 Vision or something like that. It should have been It Takes a Village with the Berwyn Public Library at the center. It should have been Dreams from My Hometown Public Library. It should have been Make Berwyn, Illinois Great Again, because that's fundamentally what was in it. Excuse me. How people are wired to talk about values and how are we going to express it with money and through policy. It's all, well, I hope this little bit of insight helps, because the people that you're talking to, if they love it, are going to be willing to pay for it even during a crisis. And we have to be able to write these books, whether it's our strategic plan, our management plan, our plan of service, our reopening plan, in a way that resonates not just with the progressives out there, if we're mainly progressives, or the libertarians out there, if we're mainly libertarians, or the conservatives out there, if we're mainly conservatives. All right, let's talk about how we do that properly. How do we get more people to listen to it and fewer people to throw it across the room? The issues are broader than literacy. The key issue that's going to be driving many conversations is economic recovery and economic well-being. And yet there's still folks who are going to look at digital inclusion, literacy shortfalls, different populations with different access and equity. We have to be very cognizant of how we want to take our messaging from this RSA community and the work that you do every day and the way that you want to make sure it's expanded and potentially even entrepreneurially realized, and have more than one message, because folks in your community, there's only a few percentage of them who put literacy and library as a top 5 issue. There's also a lot of conversations happening on library social media right now. It's the 22nd of April, around do we go negative or do we go positive? And I'd like to remind everybody here that negative and positive is only a version of the truth that is true for you. Negative and positive is not a place that I would suggest that you ever try to go to, negative or positive. If you're like, okay, we need to go really negative on here, let people to show that, that if the house is on fire, they need to keep the library open, or that we need to kind of paper over the problems in the community, say it's all good, people are digital downloading right now, even though we can't actually meet our people where they need us most in person. What we need is a truth-telling kind of messaging. Otherwise, you will be seen as being, well, yeah, I mean, this is it's a mask. There's two big frames that you have to take enough of a deep breath and engage right now in this crisis to talk about how funding the library, keeping the staff in position to serve the community digitally right now, and as we move towards reopening, it's either leveraging your current success because you guys are uniquely equipped to support particular populations in this place you call home, or that your library staff and your library facilities and your networks of resource sharing are uniquely positioned to help stand in what is going to be failures. Stand in those gaps of what's going to be failures in our community around education, around workforce, around social problems and not just social distancing, around economics. You have to be in the position as a library leadership team to say whether or not your truth is leveraging success or your truth is fixing failure, because your community needs to hear that, your partners need to hear that, and your funders need to hear that truth. In fact, there's four stories that they need to hear. Stories of your success prior to the crisis and during the crisis that demonstrate your competency, which validate why you should be continued to be funded, staffed, and open, whether it's digitally or in person soon. Or the stories of the community and your failure. This is the time to do it. This is going to be scary as hell. But to speak with true integrity that says we know what the solutions are, and if there's a limited amount of tax money right now in our community, we know how to put it to maximum work, either with us solely or in partnership across the organization. Don't let anyone who's doing policy work right now, any politicians or elected officials, it's politicians if you don't like them, it's elected officials if you do, or any funders like donors, philanthropy, community trusts, forget the fact that you are an anchor institution. You're a highly networked anchor institution that can bring in resources from outside of your immediate zip code to either leverage those competencies or to fix those things that are coming. Then the two other stories, of course, are stories about people that your audience cares about. Miss Karen did that wonderful story time. Let's talk about the value system that she put to work and why we need Miss Karen in place. And you need to also be able to tell stories that your audience of decision makers wants to actually hear and not just have one note. We sometimes have a problem with our vocabulary in library land. We use the wrong pronouns. We use the word library as if it's a pronoun. What I mean here are stories of our success that demonstrate our competency, or stories of our failure that show our integrity. I did this, we need that, rather than the library. To root it in the people is to answer the question of who's spending my money. And to root it in the people is to be able to, well, perhaps protect and defend, but certainly hopefully extend the role that those people have in serving our neighbors, in serving particular populations. We have one noun in libraries. We actually need two. We need librarian, or library worker, or staff. We also need a few more verbs than read, but that's not what this one's about today. Features are the hardest thing for civilians, for people who are not part of your library, who are not part of your RSA network, to understand. The statistics I'm going to get to, though, there's a better way to talk about statistics in a minute. We need to root what you need to do your work best in the mission, vision, and values of the organization, and the mission, vision, and values of that community. I would like to suggest to everyone who works in a public library that we need to remember that our bosses in the city council, our bosses who are the voters, are not the school board, that the mission, vision, and values of any elected official in a city council, in a town board, even on a county, interesting place to live, thriving place to live, prosperous place to live. And all three of those things are something that the library works on. Interesting is your programming. Thriving, of course, is things like literacy, but it's also health, it's also connections. And prosperous is all of the work that you do around individuals looking for work and businesses looking for an edge. And yet, we are, what are the expected and hoped for outcomes of those new features? And people, staff, librarians, I don't care if you're an MLS or not, the expected and hoped for outcomes of a feature could include people. Like, why do we need Miss Karen? And to be able to bring that up to the surface is really important. And then what happens if you don't do the work needs to be addressed. What happens if we don't have, well, the solution that you folks provide in place for those people that we care about in this place that we call home? In a crisis moment, you have to work on defining not just the positives, but also the negatives. And defining the negative is extremely difficult because, well, I mean, we're seeing it right now. Hey, we flattened the curve. Let's go back out and party. No, dummies. Like, we're flattening the curve. Let's stay inside some more until we can get this thing properly flattened, and we can hold off until, like, the infection rate. To say that we've done something and nothing happened is really, really hard for people to understand. We've done something around workforce, and there was less of a crisis. This library's done something around education, there's less of a crisis. We've done something around support for local businesses, there's less of a crisis. If you don't tell that on that narrative yourself, nobody's gonna put two and two together on your behalf. We need to talk about Plan B as well as Plan A whenever we're talking about our funding. Plan B is what happens if you don't have enough money to do it. Plan B is what happens to people if you guys go missing. And you are the only experts in your community about the role of the library in doing that. And to be able to say to them, it's not just some abstract institution that's currently not able to serve in the public with its doors fully widely open, but we're eager to get back to that ready to reopen conversation. Plan B is what happens if we don't? Who are we leaving behind? How are we going to be slower in our recovery? How are we going to be less of a thriving place to live? Turning those features that produce that transformational change into values and mission aligned statements. We're here to help at every library. It's one of the things that we do. I'm very happy to consult with you on this, but I also know that the lives touched, changed, and improved conversation, the expert librarian solving problems and helping people conversation is, well, it's not unique. I mean, there's 9,780 something public libraries in this country. There's 9,780 appeals to your uniqueness. It's not necessarily unique. It's peculiar or particular in your zip code. But if you need some thinking through about how to make those conversations happen prior to a crisis breaking across your shores, I'd really like to be able to do that with you. Let's talk for a minute about language. There's a lot of differences in language between, well, language that we speak, but also the language that people hear. There's a big need for us to very quickly, as library people, move beyond a progressive idiom. The progressive, conservative, and libertarians out there who are elected officials who are going to be making very hard decisions about funding real soon in every single community. And if you're in a library district, great, but if your funding comes from state aid at all, also, and there's a disconnect sometimes because the work that we do as libraries cuts across progressive, conservative, and libertarian modes. And yet, if you personally or you collectively are a little bit more, well, we've looked at the national voter data. 78% of people who have the word library or librarian, library worker, some version of LIB with an asterisk on it, attached to their name in the national voter file in states that have partisan primaries, pulled Democrat ballots. And I know that an organization or that an industry that has such a strong rooting in professional ethics that is so equity lens focused has to talk sometimes to old white dudes who make you crazy. And yet they're the ones also who are sitting on city council, perhaps. We need to have a quick master's class in this about how do we talk about taxes in a way that is either helping folks, this one we're pretty good with, helping folks who are at the margins, but to conservatives, how does a limited amount of smart tax money help support the we of our community during this time of crisis by the community anchor institution of the library? And how do we talk to libertarians who right now, well, there's that old adage about in a foxhole, nobody's an atheist. In a global pandemic, nobody's a libertarian. How do we talk to them in a way that shows that we're focusing our attention as a library on helping somebody with a hand up instead of a hand out? You've been taught for years and years and years not to do statistics, to do stories. That's completely wrong pre-crisis, and it's also completely wrong currently in the crisis when the policymakers, the elected officials, and the politicians are looking at a very small amount of available money. Money's disappearing from the world right now because taxes are not being paid on sales and use. Income tax receipts are low. The only thing that's stable right now is property taxes. You've got people who have to look very closely at the dollars and cents and make strong decisions based on it. This is a time when stats matter. What are the outcomes of your activities? Whether they're bulletproof statistics or if they're anecdata, it kind of doesn't matter right now. You need to bring those to the surface because there's a whole group of people who are making decisions in a crisis who are essentially sports fans. And I'm not one, but my father-in-law is. I'm going to tell you a brief story about my father-in-law, Ed. Ed right now is sheltering in place. He is in deep mourning right now. He's also, of course, concerned about his family, but he's in deep mourning because there's no sports on TV right now and it's killing him, okay? It's the thing I worry about him most about right now. He used to watch ESPN 1, 2, 3, and 5. I think there's a 5. And then the next morning he would go to the gas station and buy the Chicago Sun-Times. Again, he and I don't have a lot of things that we do together, but he goes to Chicago Sun-Times, open up the newspaper, and then check the box scores, even though he was up until 2 in the morning watching the games. And then what he would do next is that after he went through the data and the stats, he'd turn the page. And what he does when he turns the page is he reads the story about the team and how they're overcoming a slump, or they're on a streak, or he reads the story about the star player who's doing something really wonderful and magical, and he's the next Jordan, or reads about the coach, reads about how they came together to overcome adversity, or how to make their legacy. Folks, there's a lens about statistics where folks are looking, policymakers, decision makers right now, are looking to see if your stats are effective, and they're also looking to be able to see behind it who the team is. Because that question of who's going to spend my money is present, especially in a crisis. All right, please, 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 please. It's not just about the users, it's about the shared value system. And if our marketing and messaging is to say that if we get more, sharing happening, we will fulfill more user needs, yeah, that's transactional. And yet, what is the value system inherent in fulfilling, with sharing, those user needs? If we can do about yesterday more than tomorrow during this crisis, and I don't mean pre-crisis. I don't mean before St. Patrick's Day. I mean, like, what did we do literally yesterday to stand in the gap? And how does our anchor institution, with a staff that's paid to do their jobs right now, get it done tomorrow as well? There's a bunch of people out there who, while user status doesn't matter, are still wired to be users. You can tell them a great story that begins with the phrase, as you know. As you know, with the library's doors closed right now and the Wi-Fi on in the parking lot, we're serving more people ever before in a really weird way. And the digital downloads are off the hook and the kids are doing story time. As you know, we're the only place in town, synchronously and asynchronously, that can do this. As you know, our staff is eager to come back and to do it in person as soon as we figure out how to do it properly. To the non-user, to tell them a story about the work that you're doing that says, as you can imagine, as a community anchor institution in town with a networked effect across all the libraries in our state, we are doing transformational work every day for these people. We're standing in some gaps. We're fulfilling that entertainment need that people, so they don't go a little bit crazy. As you can imagine, without us in the recovery, we won't be able to do the good things that we need to be, the good people that we need to be. All right, folks. Like I said, I haven't seen the chat. I don't know what's going on. I'm not exactly sure how to even see it, Anna.
There are, well, let me pull it up. I had it just a second ago. I do not have any questions yet, but if
That's
anyone
fine.
does have any, we have about 4 minutes, I believe.
One of the interesting things about this set of information is that it's a little bit outside of our zone, and it takes a moment or two to like kind of take a deep breath and see if it resonates, you know? So even if it's not questions, if it's just comments right now, I'll take them.
All right. All right. So if anyone does have any questions or comments, put them in the chat. And just also a reminder that we will be having our second remote roundtable. So I will also put the link to that meeting in the chat for anyone who does want to move rooms. But we'll give everyone a minute if in case anyone is typing a question.
Absolutely. In the meantime, while you're typing, let me see here. This is us. So action.everlibrary.org is our petition site. Us on Facebook, you can follow along. We're doing a lot of work right now to talk to the American public about what librarians are up to, what library workers are up to today during the crisis. We want to be able to share all this kind of stuff and to be able to tell those good stories means that I'd like to get some more of those good stories from you too. Mary, you're asking about, went to the website but didn't find anything. Do you have any of these slides or information on the website for librarians? Yes, and the yes and on here is that Anna and Mary and the team will be sharing both the video from today and my slide deck, Anna, in the next, 48 hours?
Probably. I am, hopefully we'll be pretty fast with that. We'll find it a home on the website, somewhere to put the slides and things like that. And then the video recording will be going up on our YouTube channel, the RSA YouTube channel, in the next couple of days. I'll send an email to the listserv with where to find all of that once I get it posted.
That's great. And to Mary's question about can I provide additional resources, we've got a very good bibliography I'll tack on the end of the slide deck happily.
Okay.
Great. And then practically speaking, right now we are, well, this is some of the additional information. You don't have to buy the book. You can interlibrary loan it. Seems now's the time to apply a psychic force to marketing self to build ourselves, from Kathleen. I completely agree with you, Kathleen. This is an interesting time where to tell the stories about the impacts that you're having, the impacts that you are anticipating having, as opposed to getting somebody to show up for a program, download a book. Butts in seats right now matter a lot less than what's going to happen to your community with you in place and or without you guys in place. Kevin, your question about what is something during user interaction, say circulation assistance, can do to encourage library support over library usage? It's not necessarily in the user interaction moment. It's in the thing I would ask for from someone in like a circulation assistant position is a story about why you're working at the library that we can use in the library's marketing. What's your own personal values, vision, and mission that makes it interesting to you to work in this place? to work with people, to work in the back room and in front of house, and to be able to share that out, and in a user interaction, to be able to ask someone not just what they need, but for their opinion, insight, and understanding of what their community needs. Smaller library district with few services and little access to local media. You have Facebook and a web page, Kathy. We post posters throughout the district about services and do a monthly newsletter. Can I offer suggestions about other avenues to inform our supporters about what we do? You just restarted a friends group, which is fantastic, Kathy. I'm going to invite you to get in touch with me personally on this one. Again, we're pro bono on this. You've got a very detailed landscape of your own community in your head. I want to help you fine tune it. In general, it's about audience segmentation and understanding more messaging across two axes. One axis is the populations that you're serving beyond just the literacy services, and the other axis of communication is around the place that you call home and the way that your community anchor institution, which is the library, is rooted in that. I think we can help you fine tune it. Mary, thanks for saying it was insightful. That makes my day.
It was wonderful. Thank you very much for doing this for us, John. We really appreciate it, and we really appreciate everyone attending and asking questions and all of that.
And like I said before, we're certainly available, myself, my colleague Patrick. If you're thinking about or nervous about a ballot measure in particular, now's the time to talk to me. The win-loss rate is, I mean, there are so many new variables right now, I don't even know where to begin. But what I know well, forgive me, I do know where to begin, and that's in your strategic plan or your building plan and communicating with other stakeholders in the community. I mean, if you have to go to the ballot in November, let's talk. If you have to go to the ballot next spring, let's talk.
All right.
Good.
Well, thank you again so much. One more question came in from Kathleen at Quincy.
Kathleen, I'm sorry, yeah, if we have one more minute. We're a city library with the loss of sales tax revenue. What can I and our board do? Kathleen, we got to talk about the specifics. Okay, that one is there are a couple of pathways. They're all triage at this point, but I want to be able to have a conversation with you about that. All right, Anna, thanks again.
Okay, thank you so much, John. We really appreciate it. And I do encourage you to follow Every Library on social media and things like that. They often have, you know, like the Twitter account often posts interesting library articles and news and stuff. It's very well worth a follow. So,
great.
All right. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Cheers, bye-bye.
All right, I will stop the recording.